The morning cold bit through the cabin walls like teeth on bone. Marcus Brennan sat at the rough pine table watching steam rise from his coffee cup in lazy spirals. 2 days. In 2 days, he would board a bus to Parris Island, South Carolina, where the Marine Corps would either forge him into something stronger or break him trying. He was 18 years old and he was terrified. Across the table, Silas Drummond moved with the careful deliberation of a man who had lived 95 years and intended to see a few more. His hands gnarled as mountain roots worked the French press with practiced efficiency. Those hands had pulled Marcus into this world 18 years ago when complications during birth had threatened both mother and child. A wilderness delivery 60 miles from the nearest hospital with only those weathered hands and fierce determination standing between life and death. Marcus had heard that story 100 times. Today he needed to hear a different one. Great-Grandpa Silas, Marcus said, the words catching in his throat like burrs. I'm scared. I'm too young for this. Too young to know if I'm making the right choice. Silas settled into his chair with the slow grace of settling snow. His eyes pale blue as winter skies studied Marcus's face. For a long moment, the only sound was the pop and hiss of the wood stove. Too young, Silas repeated, his voice carrying the texture of worn leather. Let me tell you about the time I was too old for something. Marcus leaned forward. Outside, the Montana wilderness stretched in every direction, ocean and eternal. Inside, the old man's face shifted, remembering. The year you were born, Silas began. I was 77. People said I was too old to be a great-grandfather. Too old to help with a home birth. Too old to do much of anything except wait for the end. He paused, pouring coffee with steady hands that contradicted his words. But the most important thing I ever did started when I was 70, when everyone said I was finished, done, past my time. Silas's gaze drifted to the window, to the mountain peaks catching first light. That's when I met your great-grandmother, Ruth, and when everything changed. The cabin dissolved around them, time folded backward like pages turning in a book only memory could read. September 2000. The Montana wilderness wore autumn like a crown. Aspens blazed gold against dark pines. The air tasted of coming winter, sharp and clean as broken glass. Sister Ruth Brennan climbed alone, her habit traded for practical hiking clothes, though the silver crucifix at her throat marked her as surely as any veil. 65 years old, 40 of those years given to the Franciscan sisters. Missions in Kentucky coal country, where she had delivered babies in trailers without running water. Teaching posts on Indian reservations where textbooks were scarce, but need was abundant. Nursing work in inner-city hospitals where gunshot wounds arrived on Saturday nights with the regularity of prayer. All of it meaningful, all of it purpose-given form. Until 6 months ago, when Mother Superior Francis had called her into that wood-paneled office and spoken words that felt like burial. Sister Ruth, perhaps it's time to consider a less demanding assignment. Administrative work suits sisters of your age and experience. Your age, as if 65 was a door closing instead of simply another door. As if the skills she had spent 40 years honing suddenly meant nothing because her hair had gone silver and her hands showed the map of time. So Ruth had taken this unauthorized retreat, a week alone in the mountains to pray, to think, to rage if necessary, at a God who seemed content to let her waste away behind a desk, counting donation checks. The trail narrowed. Rocky outcroppings rose on either side like the walls of a cathedral, built by forces that cared nothing for human prayer. Ruth's breath came harder now, thin air and elevation combining with exhaustion. She should turn back. Sensible Sister Ruth, always following rules, always playing it safe. Except safe had led her to a desk. Safe had made her invisible. The sound reached her first, a huffing grunt, heavy and wet. Then the smell, rank and wild, cutting through the pine scent like a blade. Ruth's training kicked in before her mind could catch up. She froze, making herself small against the rock face. The grizzly emerged from the tree line 30 feet below. 800 pounds of muscle and instinct, its shoulder hump, rolling with each step. Blood matted the fur on its left flank. A wounded animal, the most dangerous kind. Ruth's heart hammered against her ribs hard enough to hurt. She had delivered babies in blizzards, stitched knife wounds by candlelight, talked down men high on methamphetamine with a voice like cool water. None of it had prepared her for the primal terror of being prey. The bear's head swung toward her, Small eyes, surprisingly small for such a massive skull, locked onto her position. It huffed again, a sound that vibrated in Ruth's chest. She ran. Training said, "Stay still, make yourself large, speak in calm tones." Panic said, "Run," and panic was louder. Her boots skidded on loose scree as she scrambled up the narrow trail. Behind her, the sound of pursuit turned her blood to ice water. The bear was fast. Impossibly fast for something so large. Ruth grabbed at handholds, pulling herself up onto a narrow ledge barely wide enough for her body. Below, the grizzly paced, its massive head swaying as it searched for a root up. Then it found one. The bear lunged upward with terrifying agility. One massive paw swept out claws like curved knives. Ruth threw herself backward. Not fast enough. Fire exploded across her left forearm as claws found flesh. Blood bloomed through her jacket sleeve, hot and immediate. She pressed herself against the rock face trapped. The ledge ended 5 feet in either direction. Below, the bear was climbing, finding purchase in cracks Ruth could barely see. Her vision narrowed to a tunnel. This was how it would end. Alone on a mountain, pride and stubbornness her only companions. The first gunshot cracked across the canyon like the voice of God. The bear roared, rearing back on its hind legs. A second shot followed, precise and final. The animal staggered, took 3 uncertain steps, and collapsed among the boulders with a sound like a falling tree. Ruth's hands shook so badly she could barely grip the rock. Blood ran down her arm, dripping from her fingertips onto stone. Her vision swam. Footsteps above. Careful, deliberate moving along the ridge with the confidence of someone who knew this terrain like the rooms of their own home. A figure appeared silhouetted against the sky, man-shaped, but moving with an economy of motion that spoke of decades, not years. He descended to her position with a grace that seemed to ignore the steepness of the slope. As he drew closer, Ruth could make out details. 70, perhaps older, silver-white hair beneath a worn cap, face deeply lined by sun and wind and time. But the hands holding the rifle were steady as stone. "Are you hurt badly?" His voice carried the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in emergencies. Ruth looked at her arm. Blood had soaked through the makeshift pressure bandage she had managed. The world tilted slightly. "I think I'll live," she heard herself say, surprised her voice worked at all. "Thank you. I thought I was going to die up here." The man shouldered his rifle and knelt beside her, already examining the wound with the practiced efficiency of field medicine. His touch was gentle but thorough. Not a Dr. Ruth's nurse training told her, but someone who had treated plenty of injuries. "We need to get you down from here and find shelter," he said, producing a proper first aid kit from his pack. "There's a cabin about 2 miles from here where we can tend to those wounds properly." He worked quickly, cleaning and bandaging the claw marks with supplies that spoke of preparation and experience. Ruth watched his face. Weathered like driftwood, but the eyes were sharp, pale blue like winter sky just before snow. "I'm 65 years old, sir," Ruth said, testing her ability to stand on the narrow ledge. The words came out before she could stop them, a confession of the inadequacy she had been feeling for months. "Far too old to be your concern in these mountains." The man's weathered face shifted into what might have been a smile, though his eyes held something deeper. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. "I'm 70, he replied, the words simple as prayer. "We'll be slow together then." Something in that matter-of-fact acceptance made Ruth's throat tight. Not pity, not condescension, just acknowledgement that they were both operating under similar constraints, and that was acceptable. More than acceptable. It was enough. The descent took an hour. The stranger, who introduced himself only as Silas Drummond, guided her with patient hands and quiet instructions. Despite his age, he moved through the wilderness with fluid confidence that spoke of deep familiarity. Ruth found herself studying his profile as they navigated the treacherous slope, the deep lines around his eyes, the silver stubble covering his lean cheeks, the way he paused every few minutes to check on her without making a show of it. They stopped beside the dead grizzly. The massive animal lay motionless among the scattered boulders, its fur matted with blood. Silas knelt beside it, and Ruth saw his expression shift to something approaching grief. "He was a magnificent animal," Silas said quietly, his voice carrying genuine regret. "Probably just protecting territory he's held for years. I'm sorry it had to end this way." The words surprised Ruth. She had expected relief, perhaps pride at having made such a difficult shot. Instead, she heard mourning. It made her look at her rescuer with new attention. This was not a man who killed lightly, even to save a life. "You saved my life," Ruth said simply. "I'm grateful regardless of the sign." Silas nodded but did not reply immediately. He placed one weathered hand on the bear's massive shoulder, a gesture that seemed both respectful and final. Then he stood shouldering his pack, and they continued toward the cabin. The structure appeared as the light began to fail. Solid logs expertly fitted with solar panels gleaming dully on the roof. Smoke rose from the stone chimney in a thin gray line. It looked permanent, intentional. Not the rough shelter of a weekend hunter, but a home chosen with care. Inside the cabin was spartanly furnished, but scrupulously clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. Medical supplies were neatly organized on shelves near the kitchen area. Ruth's trained eye noted the quality of the organization. Someone who lived far from help had learned to be prepared. Then she saw the crucifix, small wooden hanging on the wall beside a window. Below it, a rosary draped over a shelf that held books. Even from across the room, Ruth could make out the spines. St. Augustine, Thomas Merton, the Confessions, the Seven-Story Mountain. "You're a man of faith." The question escaped before Ruth could consider whether it was appropriate. Silas's hands paused in their work of building a fire. "Was, once." He did not elaborate, and something in his tone discouraged further questions. Ruth watched him work, noting the careful precision of his movements. The fire caught quickly built with the expertise of someone who had done this thousands of times. "Sit down and let me look at that arm properly," Silas said, gathering fresh supplies from the medical kit. "The wounds need to be cleaned before infection sets in." Ruth settled into a wooden chair near the fireplace, suddenly aware of how exhausted she felt. She watched Silas work, noting the gentle efficiency of his movements as he prepared to tend her injuries. His hands were steady as he cleaned the claw marks, his touch surprisingly gentle for someone who lived alone in the wilderness. The antiseptic stung sharply, but Ruth found herself more interested in studying her rescuer's face than focusing on the pain. There was a quietness to him that felt intentional. Not the awkward silence of someone uncomfortable with people, but the comfortable silence of someone who had made peace with solitude. "You've done this before," Ruth observed, watching him apply fresh bandages with practiced skill. "Living out here, you learn to handle medical emergencies," Silas replied without looking up. "The nearest hospital is over 100 miles away, so you either learn to take care of yourself and others, or you don't survive very long." "How long have you lived out here?" Silas finished securing the bandage before answering. The pause stretched long enough that Ruth wondered if he would answer at all. "Going on 15 years now," he said finally. "Came up here after my wife passed, thought I needed some time to think, never quite got around to leaving." There was a weight of unspoken history in those simple words, a suggestion of grief and loss that Ruth recognized from her own experience. The fire crackled and popped, filling the silence between them. "I'm sorry for your loss," Ruth said quietly, meaning it. Silas nodded acknowledgement but did not elaborate. He prepared a simple meal from canned goods, moving around the small kitchen with easy familiarity. They ate in companionable silence the events of the day, creating an odd sense of intimacy between two strangers who had shared a life-threatening experience. "What brought you up here alone?" Silas asked eventually, his pale eyes reflecting the firelight. "These mountains aren't exactly friendly to solo hikers, especially this time of year." Ruth considered how to answer. The full truth felt too raw, too complicated to share with someone she had just met. But something about the quiet acceptance in Silas's face made her want to be honest. "I suppose I was trying to prove something to myself," she admitted. "That I wasn't ready to be put out to pasture just yet. My superiors think I should move into administrative work, spend my days playing with spreadsheets and complaining about my arthritis." "Your superiors," Silas's tone held a question. Ruth touched the crucifix at her throat, suddenly self-conscious. "I'm a Franciscan sister, have been for 40 years, or Sister Ruth Brennan, if we're being formal." Something shifted in Silas's expression. Surprise, yes, but also something else. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. "A nun," he said quietly. "That explains the rosary I saw. You were observant. Force of habit. Living alone, you notice everything." The conversation continued as the fire burned down to glowing embers. ranging from practical matters of mountain survival to more philosophical questions about the choices that had brought them both to this remote cabin. Ruth learned that Silas had been a civil engineer before retirement, a man accustomed to solving problems through careful analysis and methodical action. Silas discovered that Ruth had been a teacher and nurse for 43 years, someone who had spent her career nurturing others. Her recent restlessness stemmed partly from the loss of that sense of purpose, the feeling that administrative work had left her without a meaningful role. "You should get some sleep," Silas said, eventually banking the fire for the night. "That arm is going to be sore tomorrow, and you'll need your strength for the hike back to civilization." The small bedroom he showed her was simply furnished but comfortable, with a handmade quilt covering the narrow bed and a window that looked out over the moonlit forest. Ruth lay awake for a long time, listening to the wind in the pines and thinking about the strange mercy that had brought her to this place. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon, pale morning light filtering through the window. Silas was already dressed and moving around the kitchen, his movements quietly efficient. "How's the arm feeling?" he asked, pouring coffee into a heavy ceramic mug. "Sore, but not too bad," Ruth replied, testing the range of motion carefully. "You're up early." "Old habits. The mountains don't sleep late, and neither do the people who live in them." They discussed the logistics of getting her back to her rental car over breakfast. The trail back to the main hiking path was about 5 miles, Silas explained, spreading a topographical map on the kitchen table. It was rough going in places, but manageable if they took their time. Ruth studied the map, noting the steep terrain and numerous creek crossings. Under normal circumstances, she would have been confident in her ability to handle such a hike. But her injured arm in the previous day's ordeal had left her feeling less certain. "That's a lot of ground to cover," she said, trying to keep any note of apprehension out of her voice. "We'll take it slow," Silas said simply. "No point in rushing and risking another accident. I don't want to be more of a burden than I already have been. You've done more than enough already." Silas's response was immediate and firm. "You're not a burden, and I'm not about to let you try that hike alone with a wounded arm and no backup plan." The journey took most of the morning. Silas set a steady but unhurried pace, frequently checking on Ruth's condition and adjusting their route to avoid the most challenging terrain. His knowledge of the local geography was encyclopedic, built from years of careful observation and hard-won experience. They paused frequently for rest breaks. During one of these stops, sitting on a fallen log, while mountain jays called overhead, Silas told her more about his past. "I almost became a priest," he said, the words coming slowly as if each one had weight. "Seminary 4 years, left 3 months before ordination." Ruth turned to look at him, startled. "Why?" "Met Margaret, my wife, at my sister's wedding. She was a bridesmaid." Silas's face softened with memory. "I realized I was running from life, not toward God. The priesthood would have been the wrong choice for the wrong reasons." "And you married her instead?" 30 years. The happiest years of my life. No regrets about leaving." He paused, looking out at the mountains. "She died of cancer, 15 years ago this October. I came up here to mourn for a week. Stayed because I couldn't figure out where else to go." Ruth sat with that revelation, understanding more now about the man beside her. "Do you regret leaving the seminary?" Silas met her eyes directly. "Never, not once. Margaret taught me that there's no higher calling than loving one person completely or serving the people right in front of you. The seminary would have given me a title. She gave me a purpose." They walked in silence after that, both lost in their own thoughts. Ruth found herself thinking about purpose, about calling, about the difference between the work you were assigned and the work that actually mattered. The parking area appeared like a return to a world Ruth had briefly forgotten. Cars filled every available space. Families unloaded elaborate camping gear. The sound of car radios replaced the peaceful quiet of the deep forest. Ruth felt a strange displacement as she looked around for her vehicle. It sat exactly where she had left it, covered with dust and pine needles, but otherwise unchanged. Silas helped her load her gear, his movements efficient but somehow reluctant. "I don't know how to properly thank you," Ruth said, finally standing beside her car. "You saved my life, and then you went far beyond what anyone could have expected." Silas shrugged, the same gesture of casual dismissal he had used before. "You would have done the same for anyone in similar circumstances." "Would I have?" Ruth asked, genuinely uncertain. "You're a nurse, a sister. Helping people is what you do." As she prepared to drive away, Ruth felt an unexpected reluctance to leave this enigmatic mountain man behind. Their brief time together had revealed depths of character and capability that she found deeply compelling. Not romantic attraction, she told herself firmly. Spiritual kinship, recognition of a fellow traveler on a difficult path. Will I see you again? She asked, surprised by her own boldness. Silas's pale eyes studied her face for a long moment. These mountains are my home. You know where to find me if you ever need anything. The drive back to Helena gave Ruth time to process everything that had happened. She had set out to prove her continued independence, only to find herself completely dependent on a stranger's kindness. Yet somehow the experience had left her feeling more confident rather than diminished. At the small medical clinic in town, a doctor confirmed what Silas had already told her. The wounds were healing cleanly, and the quality of the wilderness first aid she had received was excellent. You're talking about Silas Drummond, the doctor said with obvious respect. That man has brought more injured hikers down from those mountains than anyone else in the county. You were lucky he was in the area. Lucky. Ruth turned the word over in her mind as she drove the final stretch to the mother house. Was it luck? Or was it something else, some pattern she could not quite see, threads weaving together in ways that suggested intention rather than accident? The Helena mother house rose before her like a fortress built of brick and tradition. 100 sisters live within its walls, their lives ordered by bells and prayers and the rhythms of religious community. Ruth had loved this place once, found comfort in its predictability, its ancient routines. Now pulling into the familiar parking lot, she felt only constraint, as if she had spent 3 days breathing mountain air and forgotten how to tolerate walls. Mother Superior Frances met her at the door, her face set in lines of disapproval, barely tempered by relief. Sister Ruth, we were worried. I apologize, Mother. The retreat took longer than expected. Your sabbatical seems to have unsettled you. Ruth could not deny it. Something had shifted during those days in the mountains. Some internal compass had been calibrated differently, and she could not make it point back to where it had been before. The routine of convent life closed around her like water filling a jar. Morning prayers, breakfast in silence, administrative work in the office she shared with 2 other sisters, lunch, more paperwork, afternoon prayers, dinner, evening recreation, night prayers, bed, day after day after day, each one identical to the last. Ruth tried to focus, tried to find meaning in the spreadsheets, in donation receipts, in correspondence that filled her hours. But her mind kept drifting to the cabin in the mountains, to the quiet competence of the man who lived there, to the feeling of being genuinely needed, rather than simply present. 6 weeks passed. Autumn deepened toward winter. The mountains visible from the mother house windows turned white at their peaks, snow creeping down the slopes like an advancing army. Then the phone call came. Ruth was in the office staring at a budget report that refused to make sense when Sister Dorothy appeared in the doorway. Ruth, phone call for you, County Sheriff's Office. The world tilted slightly. Ruth's heart began to hammer before she even picked up the receiver. Sheriff's Office meant emergency, meant something had gone wrong. This is Sister Ruth Brennan. Ma'am, this is Deputy Collins with the Flathead County Sheriff's Department. We're calling about Silas Drummond. He's listed you as an emergency contact. The room contracted to a single point. What happened? Mr. Drummond was injured in a backcountry skiing accident. Broken leg, possible concussion. He's at Mountain Regional Hospital. Doctors say he needs supervised care for 6 to 8 weeks. Can't return home alone. Ruth was moving before she finished processing the information. I'm on my way. She hung up without asking permission, grabbed her coat, and headed for the door. Sister Dorothy called after her questions in her voice, but Ruth was already gone. 3 hours to the hospital. 3 hours while Silas lay in a bed surrounded by strangers, probably furious at his own weakness, definitely alone. The hospital was modern, all glass and steel and efficiency. Ruth found Silas in a semi-private room, leg elevated in traction, face pale against white pillows. The sight of him diminished by injury and hospital gown made something twist in her chest. His eyes opened when she entered. Surprise flickered across his face. I didn't expect you to come. Ruth pulled a chair close to the bed, her nurse training automatically assessing his condition, even as relief flooded through her. You saved my life. Of course I came. It's a long drive. Not as long as the one you made carrying me to your cabin. A ghost of a smile touched Silas's weathered face. Then it faded, replaced by frustration. The doctors are insisting I can't go home. Say I need supervision, medical monitoring. They're right. Concussions are serious, especially at our age. I can manage. Can you, Ruth asked gently, alone and with a broken leg and head injury miles from help? Silas had no answer. The silence between them filled with unspoken complications. Ruth heard herself speak before she had fully decided to. I could stay with you. I'm a nurse. I have the skills you need. You're a nun. That's not appropriate. The word appropriate hung in the air between them. Ruth thought about 40 years of appropriate, 40 years of doing what was expected, following rules, staying within carefully drawn lines. And where had it brought her? To a desk filing papers, counting the years until death made her truly useless. I'm 65 years old, Ruth said firmly. Propriety seems less important than practicality. Your order would never allow it. Let me worry about my order. She left Silas to rest and went to make the call she had been avoiding. The payphone in the hospital corridor felt like a confessional. Ruth fed quarters into the slot and dialed the number she knew by heart. Mother Superior Frances answered on the third ring. Mother, this is Sister Ruth. I'm calling from Mountain Regional Hospital. What's wrong? Are you injured? No, Mother, but the man who saved my life during my retreat has been hurt. Skiing accident, broken leg and concussion. He needs medical supervision for several weeks and he has no one. A pause. Ruth could hear Frances thinking, calculating, drawing conclusions. Sister Ruth, you cannot be suggesting what I think you're suggesting. He needs help, Mother. I can provide it. I'm a trained nurse. There are home health services. He can hire professionals. He lives 100 miles from the nearest town. No services reach his area. Mother, if he tries to return home alone, he could die. Then he should remain in a medical facility. Frances's voice was cooling, hardening into the tone she used when giving final decisions. Sister Ruth, I understand your gratitude to this man, but living alone with him is absolutely inappropriate and irregular. Ruth closed her eyes, saw Silas's cabin in her mind, the crucifix on the wall, the rosary on the shelf, the quiet dignity of a man who had chosen solitude over the constant noise of a world that had taken from him the person he loved most. Mother, this is work of mercy. It's what Franciscans do. It is not what Franciscan sisters do while living alone with strange men. The steel in Frances's voice would have stopped Ruth a month ago, 6 weeks ago, before the bear, before the cabin, before she understood what it felt like to be genuinely useful again. Mother, I am telling you what I intend to do. I would like your permission and blessing. But with or without them, I am going to help Silas Drummond. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, Ruth thought the connection had been lost. Sister Ruth Brennan. Frances's voice when it came was cold as winter stone. If you do this without permission, there will be canonical consequences. Do you understand what you're risking? I understand, Mother. Then return to the mother house immediately. That is a direct order under your vow of obedience. Ruth's hand tightened on the phone receiver. 40 years. 40 years of obedience, of submission, of trusting that those in authority knew better than she did what God wanted from her life. I'm sorry, Mother Superior. The words came out steady, though Ruth's heart felt like it might beat its way out of her chest. I cannot obey this order. Cannot or will not. Both, they amount to the same thing. Sister Ruth, you are making a grave mistake. Perhaps, but it's my mistake to make. Ruth hung up before Frances could respond. Her hands were shaking. First act of disobedience in 40 years of religious life. First time she had ever refused a direct order. The weight of it should have crushed her. Instead, she felt strangely light. She returned to Silas's room. He was awake, watching her with those pale blue eyes that seemed to see more than most people. You made your call. Yes. And I told them I'm staying with you until you're recovered. Ruth, the use of her name without the title felt intimate, significant. You don't have to do this. I know, but I want to. There's a difference. December arrived with the first serious snow. Ruth moved into the cabin, insisting on separate bedrooms, despite the awkwardness it created in the small space. Silas, still on crutches, was frustrated by his limitations but trying to hide it. Ruth saw through the facade. Nurses always did. They established routines. Ruth rose at 5 for lauds, the morning prayer she had been saying for 40 years. Found Silas already awake, coffee brewing, watching her with quiet curiosity as she prayed. By 6, she was checking his vitals, monitoring for any signs that the concussion was worsening. 8 o'clock brought physical therapy exercises. Silas grimacing through the pain, but never complaining. Ruth learned the cabin systems, how to manage the solar panels and backup generator, how to monitor the water filtration system, how to split kindling efficiently so the wood stove stayed fed. All the small skills that made life possible this far from civilization. Silas taught with the same patient precision he brought to everything. Showed her how to read weather patterns and cloud formations, how to navigate by stars when GPS failed, how to recognize the signs of wildlife nearby and which animals to avoid versus which to ignore. They prayed together. That surprised them both. Ruth said her office hours the structured prayers that marked the day for religious communities worldwide. Silas began joining her for evening prayer. Vespers, his voice rusty at first, but growing stronger. The rosary they prayed together felt like a bridge between their different paths. Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear. Ruth set up a small nativity scene she had brought from the mother house, arranging the wooden figures with hands that remembered decades of this ritual. Silas watched from his chair by the fire. I haven't celebrated Christmas in 15 years. Why not? After Margaret died, God seemed very far away. Christmas just reminded me what I'd lost. And now, Silas looked at the nativity, at Ruth's careful arrangement of Holy Family and shepherds and kings. Now he seems less distant, thanks to you. They attended midnight mass at the smallest church 30 miles away. The drive was treacherous, snow falling steadily, but Ruth navigated carefully. The church was packed, families crowding into pews, children squirming with excitement. Ruth felt eyes on her and Silas, knew what people were thinking. The nun and the hermit, scandal waiting to happen. Let them think what they wanted. She knew the truth. This was ministry. This was service. This was exactly where she was supposed to be. The package arrived 3 days after Christmas, delivered by Jose Lee, Silas's nearest neighbor, who checked on him monthly. Ruth recognized the mother house return address with a sinking feeling. Inside was a formal letter on heavy paper, the kind used for official church business. Sister Ruth Brennan, your continued absence without permission constitutes grave disobedience to your vow of obedience. You are hereby ordered to return to the mother house by January 1st, 2001, or face canonical consequences, including potential dismissal from the order. This is your final warning. Mother Superior, Francis Keller, OSF. Ruth read the letter 3 times. Each reading felt like a door closing. She looked up to find Silas watching her, his expression carefully neutral. Bad news. An ultimatum. Ruth's voice sounded distant to her own ears. Return by New Year's Day, or they'll expel me from the order. You should go. Silas's words were quiet but firm. I can manage now, the leg's healing well. Ruth looked at him, really looked, saw past the surface to the man beneath, someone who had left the seminary 3 months before ordination because he understood the difference between running from something and running toward it. Someone who had loved completely and lost and survived the grief. Someone who had built a life of meaning and solitude, but recognized the value of partnership. Can you manage? She asked. Really? That's not the question. Silas leaned forward, his gaze intense. The question is whether you can stay. Those vows have defined you for 40 years. Can you really walk away? Ruth had no answer. Not yet. The question sat between them like a third presence in the room. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and indifferent. Inside, the fire burned low. And Ruth Brennan, 65 years old, trained since age 25 to obey, found herself standing at a crossroads she had never imagined she would face. New Year's Eve 2000. Ruth sat at the small desk in her borrowed bedroom, 2 sheets of paper before her. Outside, snow fell in thick curtains that turned the world into something silent and new. Inside, the wood stove ticked and popped, the only sound besides her own breathing. The first letter came easily. Words she had been composing in her head for weeks, perhaps years, finally finding their way onto paper. Dear Mother Superior, Francis. I write this with a heavy heart but clear conscience. I am requesting formal leave of absence for 6 months to discern what I believe is a new expression of my vocation. A mountain ministry serving isolated elderly and injured hikers in areas where no other medical care exists. I know there is no precedent for this kind of work within our order, but our Franciscan charism calls us to serve the poor and neglected. The people in these mountains, elderly men like Silas Drummond, living alone miles from help hikers who fall and break bones with no rescue service nearby, these are the forgotten ones, the ones who fall through every social safety net. I am not abandoning my calling. I am following it in an unexpected direction. Respectfully in Christ, Sister Ruth Brennan. The second letter was harder. Ruth stared at the blank page for a long time before the words would come. Dear Silas, if I choose to stay, it will not be because I have nowhere else to go. It will be because this is where I am needed most and where I can do the most good with the years I have remaining. I propose a formal arrangement, not charity from either side, but true partnership. I will contribute my medical skills, my organizational abilities, and the modest savings I have accumulated over 40 years. You will contribute your wilderness expertise, your property, and your knowledge of this place. We will maintain clear boundaries. Separate living quarters. Shared mission. This is partnership, not romance. Companionship, not courtship. If you agree, we can build something meaningful here. Something that serves others. If you do not, I will respect your decision and return to Helena. Ruth, she folded the second letter and left it on Silas's nightstand while he slept. Then she walked out into the snow, needing the cold air to clear her head, needing to think without walls around her. The forest at night was a study in shadow and silence. Ruth's boots crunched through fresh powder. Her breath formed clouds that dissipated into darkness. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called the sound, carrying through the crystalline air like a question without answer. What was she doing? 40 years of religious life, of vows that had shaped every decision, every relationship, every moment of her days. Could she really walk away from all of that? Should she? But was it walking away, or was it walking towards something? Silas had left the seminary not because he lost faith, but because he found a different expression of it. Perhaps this was the same. Not abandonment, but evolution. Ruth prayed as she walked. No formal prayers this time. No office hours or structured petitions. Just raw conversation with a God who seemed maddeningly silent on the subject of what he actually wanted from her. She returned to find Silas awake, sitting by the fire, her letter in his weathered hands. He looked up when she entered, the snow still dusting her shoulders. "You're sure about this?" His voice was quiet, serious. "Giving up 40 years of religious life to live on a mountain with an old hermit?" Ruth shed her coat, moved to stand by the fire. The heat felt good after the bitter cold outside. "I'm not giving up the substance of religious life, only the form. Service to those in need, that's still my vocation. The location is what's changing." "Your order won't see it that way." "No, they won't." Silas studied her face in the firelight. "This will cost you everything you have known, your community, your identity, maybe even your relationship with your church." "I know. And you're willing to pay that price." Ruth met his eyes. "Are you willing to give up 15 years of solitude to share this space, this life with someone else? That will cost you too." A long pause. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. "I accept," Silas said finally. "Partners." They shook hands. The gesture felt formal, binding. Not romance, Ruth reminded herself. Not love in that sense, but something equally valuable. Maybe more so. Two people who had found purpose together after each had lost their way alone. The knock came 6 weeks later, on a February morning so cold the windows had frosted over in intricate patterns. Ruth was cleaning breakfast dishes when she heard the vehicle approaching. Unusual. Jose didn't visit for another 2 weeks. They weren't expecting anyone. 3 people emerged from a dark SUV that had no business being on mountain roads in winter. Ruth recognized Mother Superior Francis immediately, her severe profile unmistakable, even at a distance. The priest beside her wore black with a Roman collar. The third figure, a woman in a simple dress and cardigan, carried herself with the quiet authority of someone used to being obeyed. Ruth dried her hands slowly. Her heart was beating too fast. She had known this confrontation was coming, had prepared for it as well as she could. But theory and reality were different countries, and the border between them was sharp as broken glass. Silas appeared from the back room, moving better now on his healing leg. He took one look at Ruth's face and understood. "Company," he asked quietly. "From my order. Want me to leave?" "No, stay, please." The three visitors trudged through snow to the cabin door. Ruth opened it before they could knock, standing in the doorway like a guard at a gate she had no intention of opening wide. Mother Frances, Father Walsh, Sister Margaret. Ruth kept her voice level, gave each the respect their positions demanded, if not the warmth their visit deserved. "Please come in." The cabin felt smaller with 5 people in it. Ruth offered coffee, which was declined. They all remained standing, which turned the encounter into something formal and adversarial. A tribunal, not a visit. Mother Frances spoke first, her voice cold with disapproval, barely masked by duty. "Sister Ruth, you have been absent without permission for 3 months. This constitutes grave disobedience to your vow of obedience, a fundamental betrayal of the trust placed in you when you took your vows 40 years ago." "I requested leave of absence, Mother. I have been doing medical missionary work, which is well within our order's charism." Father Walsh stepped forward, his eyes moving from Ruth to Silas and back with obvious judgment. "Sister Ruth, living alone with a man is not missionary work. It is scandal. Regardless of your intentions or his character, the appearance itself is destructive to your witness." Silas spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but carrying steel underneath. "Nothing inappropriate has happened here. Ruth has been professional and appropriate at all times. We maintain separate quarters and clear boundaries." "Mr. Drummond," the third visitor said, her tone more diplomatic than the others, "your intentions are not in question, but Sister Ruth is a consecrated religious. The appearance of impropriety is itself improper. Surely you understand that." Ruth recognized the voice of reason, which was somehow more dangerous than outright condemnation. Sister Margaret Chen, the provincial superior, the woman who had final say over Ruth's future in the order. "I understand your concerns," Ruth said, fighting to keep her voice steady, "but I ask you to understand mine. Silas was injured. He needed medical care. I am a trained nurse. I provided that care. Now that he's recovering, I've been able to help with other emergencies. Jose Lee had a heart attack last month. I kept him alive until the helicopter arrived. A hiker with a compound fracture. 3 lost teenagers. This work saves lives." Mother Frances' expression did not soften. "Then return to the mother house and serve there. We have nursing positions, teaching positions, places where you can use your skills appropriately. Serving by filing papers." The words came out sharper than Ruth intended. "Mother, I am 65 years old. I have perhaps 10, maybe 15 years of useful life remaining. I will not spend them behind a desk when I can save lives here. You have vows, Sister Ruth. You cannot simply pick and choose which ones to honor based on your personal preferences." Ruth felt something break inside her. Or perhaps it was something that had been broken for a long time, finally making a sound as it fell apart completely. "Is that what you think this is personal preference? Mother, I spent 40 years serving. Kentucky coal country delivering babies in trailers without heat. Indian reservations teaching children everyone else abandoned. Inner city hospitals treating gunshot wounds on Saturday nights. I gave everything I had, went everywhere you sent me, did every job assigned without complaint." Her voice was rising now, 40 years of suppressed frustration finding voice. "And at 65, you told me I was too old. Gave me a desk and paperwork and told me to be grateful for light duty. Well, I am not grateful. I am useful. I am needed here. And I will not apologize for choosing purpose over procedure." The silence that followed was sharp as winter air. Sister Margaret spoke into it, her voice carrying absolute authority. "Sister Ruth Brennan, you have 2 choices. Only 2, and you must choose now. Return with us today. Submit to assigned work at the Mother House. Be reinstated with full status and our support. Or remain here and we will initiate proceedings for dispensation from your vows. You will be formally released from religious life." Ruth felt the floor tilt. "You would force me to leave." Mother Frances's face was stone. "You have already left, sister. You simply haven't admitted it yet." They gave her 1 week to decide, 7 days to choose between 40 years of identity and an uncertain future, 7 days to weigh vows against calling obedience, against purpose, security against meaning. After they left, Ruth and Silas sat in silence for a long time. The cabin felt different now, not like sanctuary, but like a battlefield after the armies had withdrawn. "I'm sorry," Silas said finally. "This is my fault." "No," Ruth's voice was firm. "This is my choice, and I still don't know what the right answer is." Day 3 of the decision week arrived with a blizzard, the kind that turned the world white and erased all distinction between earth and sky. Ruth woke at 2 in the morning to the emergency radio crackling to life with a sound that jolted both her and Silas from sleep. Jose Lee was having a heart attack. His daughter Teresa's voice came through, distorted by static and panic. "Can't breathe right. Chest pain. Ambulance can't get through the snow. Please, someone help." Ruth was moving before conscious thought caught up, pulling on layers, grabbing the medical kit, running through mental checklists of cardiac emergency protocols. Silas' leg, still not fully healed, was right behind her. "I'll drive the snowmobile as close as I can get," he said. "You'll have to hike the last half-mile. Your leg can't handle operating a snowmobile one-handed." "It'll have to." The journey was brutal. Wind-driven snow hit like fists. Visibility dropped to arm's length. Ruth clung to Silas's waist as the snowmobile lurched over invisible terrain, trusting his navigation completely, because she could see nothing at all. They reached the point where even the snowmobile couldn't proceed. Ruth grabbed her medical kit and started hiking, Silas's voice following her into the white chaos, with instructions shouted over the wind. Jose's cabin appeared like a miracle. Ruth burst through the door to find the elderly man, gray-faced and gasping, his daughter Teresa crying and trying to remember CPR she'd learned 20 years ago. Ruth's training took over. Personality fell away. There was only protocol, only procedure, only the step-by-step process of keeping a human heart beating against its determination to stop. Aspirin under the tongue. Oxygen from the portable tank. IV lines started with hands that should have been shaking, but somehow stayed steady. The portable EKG showed what Ruth already knew. Myocardial infarction. Heart attack. And a bad one. "Call the helicopter, medevac," Ruth told Teresa. "Tell them cardiac emergency, immediate extraction required." Then there was nothing to do but wait and work. Medications administered in careful sequence. Monitoring vital signs that wanted to crash. Twice Jose's heart stopped entirely. Twice Ruth brought him back with CPR that left her gasping and her ribs aching, but his pulse returning. Silas appeared an hour into the crisis, having somehow navigated the snowmobile to a position where he could provide backup support. He watched Ruth work with an expression she couldn't read. Later, he would tell her what he saw. Complete transformation. Not uncertain nun struggling with vocation, but expert medical professional absolutely in control. The helicopter took 3 hours to arrive. 3 hours where Ruth held Jose Lee's life in her hands through nothing more than knowledge and will, and the refusal to let death win. When the paramedics finally came through the door with their equipment and expertise, one of them stopped and stared. "Ma'am, your field work saved his life. Where did you train?" "Missionary nursing," Ruth said, not looking up from the IV line she was monitoring. 40 years worth. "Someone wasting you behind a desk would be a crime." The words hit Ruth like lightning, not because they were flattering, but because they were true. She knew it with sudden crystalline certainty. The work she had just done, the life she had just saved, this was what she was meant for. Not paperwork, not administrative duties. This. At the hospital the next day, Jose was stable and expected to survive. Teresa hugged Ruth so hard it hurt, tears streaming down her face. "Thank God you and Silas were tough there. No one else could have reached him in time." But in the hospital cafeteria, Ruth overheard 2 nurses talking. Recognized the tone, if not the exact words. Gossip, speculation. The mountain nun who left her order to live with a man. The scandal, the inappropriate relationship. Ruth sat in the hospital chapel afterwards, surrounded by the quiet darkness of a space designed for prayer, but often used for grief. She tried to pray, but the words wouldn't come. Only questions. "I don't know what you want from me anymore." Her voice echoed slightly in the empty space. No answer came. God seemed content to let her wrestle alone. 40 years I thought I understood. Serve the poor, obey superiors, live the vows faithfully. But those vows feel like chains now. Obedience demands I abandon Jose Silas, everyone in these mountains who needs me. Is that really what you want? Still silence. Ruth closed her eyes, remembering Margaret, Silas's wife, the woman he had loved enough to leave the seminary for. On her deathbed, dying of cancer that ate her from the inside out, she had told Silas something he had shared with Ruth one evening by the fire. Don't waste years grieving. Find purpose again. God doesn't want you alone and useless. Useful. The word circled back like a bird returning to nest. That was what this was really about. Not romance, not rebellion, just the bone-deep need to be useful, to matter, to serve in ways that actually saved lives instead of shuffling papers. Ruth opened her eyes. The chapel was still empty. God was still silent, but she knew her answer. Back at the cabin that evening, she found Silas waiting by the fire. He looked up when she entered, question in his eyes. I've decided, Ruth said. And Wolfgang, but before she could answer, Silas held up a hand. Before you tell me, I need to tell you something. The whole story. You deserve to know what you're getting into if you choose to stay. He stood moving to the window, looking out at darkness and snow. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of confession. Seminary was 4 years of my life. St. John's in Boston. I was a good student, devout, driven. My spiritual director, Father Callahan, told me I would make an extraordinary priest. Silas turned back to face her. Then I met Margaret at my sister's wedding. She was a bridesmaid, beautiful and kind, and when she smiled, it was like someone had turned on lights in a room I didn't know was dark. He moved back to his chair, settling into it like a man preparing to carry heavy weight. I tried to ignore what I felt, doubled down on prayer, on studies. Told myself it was just temptation, just the devil testing my vocation. Margaret understood. She left town to make it easier for me. Ruth stayed quiet, letting him tell it at his own pace. 3 months before ordination, Father Callahan asked me a question. He said, Silas, why do you want to be a priest? I gave him all the right answers. To serve God, to bring sacraments to the faithful, to live a life of prayer and sacrifice. Silas's hands gripped the arms of his chair, and he looked at me and said, or are you running from life? Because if you're running from something, ordination is the wrong reason. You have to run toward God, not away from fear. The fire popped. Outside, wind rattled the windows. That night, I couldn't sleep. Lay awake in my seminary cell and faced the truth. I wasn't choosing priesthood because I felt called to it. I was choosing it because I was afraid. Afraid of loving someone and losing them. Afraid of the vulnerability that comes with marriage, with partnership, with binding your life to another person who might die and leave you alone. Silas met Ruth's eyes. I left the seminary, found Margaret, told her I loved her, and I was choosing her, choosing life, choosing the risk of love over the safety of celibacy. We married 6 months later. He smiled, but it was edged with old grief. 30 years, the happiest of my life. Not one single regret about leaving. She taught me that there's no hierarchy of callings, no higher or lower paths. Just the path meant for you, and everything else is someone else's journey. His voice dropped. Then she died. Cancer. Fast and brutal. And I came to these mountains to mourn for a week. Stayed 15 years because I was hiding again. From pain, from connection, from the risk of caring about anyone else. He leaned forward, intensity in every line of his weathered face. Then you appeared, bleeding on a ledge with a bear below. And for the first time in 15 years, I felt needed. Not just useful, but genuinely necessary. And I understood something. Margaret didn't save me from the wrong vocation. She saved me for the right one, which was loving her, serving her, building a life together. Silas stood, crossed to where Ruth sat. We're at the same crossroads, 25 years apart, but the same choice. Follow the rules or follow the calling. I chose the calling. No regrets, but only you can know the right answer for you. Ruth felt tears on her face. Not sadness, something else. Gratitude maybe, or recognition, or relief at finally understanding what God had been trying to tell her through all the silence. Thank you, she whispered, for showing me it's possible. to choose differently and not be wrong. February 28th arrived cold and clear. The delegation returned as promised. Ruth stood in her cabin wearing her full Franciscan habit for what she suspected would be the last time. She had written her statement, practiced it until the words felt solid. When Mother Frances, Father Walsh, and Sister Margaret entered, Ruth did not offer them seats. This needed to be done standing. Mother Superior, Father, Sister Margaret, thank you for returning. I have spent this week in prayer and discernment. I have wrestled with wrong in my own heart, and I have reached a decision. She took a breath, let it out slow. I request formal dispensation from my vows, not because I have lost faith, but because I have found a different expression of it. The Franciscan charism calls us to serve the poor, the neglected, the forgotten. In these mountains, I serve people who have fallen through every other safety net, elderly living alone, hikers without medical care, people in places no one else will go. Mother Frances opened her mouth to speak, but Ruth continued, her voice gaining strength. I am not betraying Frances's vision. I am fulfilling it, just not in the way you expected or I planned. Silas Drummond is my partner in ministry, not a romantic interest. But even if you cannot understand that I must follow what I believe is God's will for my life. The silence stretched, then Sister Margaret spoke, surprising everyone. Ruth, I understand more than you think. When I was a young nun, I wanted to work in Haiti, was told it was too dangerous for women. I obeyed, spent 40 years regretting it, teaching in comfortable schools when I could have saved lives. You're not making that mistake. I admire your courage. Mother Frances turned on her. Sister Margaret, you cannot support this. Frances, sometimes obedience is spiritual cowardice. Ruth is choosing the brave path. Father Walsh cleared his throat. Sister Ruth, if I were to write the bishop recommending you receive formal recognition as a lay minister, would you accept? Ruth stared at him. What does that mean? It means the church acknowledges your work as legitimate ministry. No vows, no restrictions, but official recognition that what you do is God's work. I would be honored, Father. The dispensation was granted. The process would take 6 months of canonical review, but the outcome was certain. Ruth Brennan would be released from her vows. No longer Sister Ruth, just Ruth. A woman choosing her own path at 65 when the world said her choosing years were done. After they left, Silas found her standing by the window, still in her habits, tears streaming down her face. Are you okay? For the first time in years, Ruth said, I'm completely sure of something. This is right. This is where I'm meant to be. No regrets. Only that I didn't have the courage to do it sooner. The legal arrangements took months to finalize. Ruth sold her modest possessions, the savings from 40 years of living in poverty. $35,000. Not wealth, but enough. The lawyer drew up partnership papers that made everything official and protected both of them. The documents spelled out contributions and rights, Ruth's medical skills and organizational abilities, Silas's property and wilderness expertise, lifetime residence for Ruth, medical power of attorney mutual, clear clauses establishing platonic partnership for community service. At Sunday Mass, Ruth faced the whispers. Mrs. Patterson, who had been friendly before, turned away deliberately when Ruth tried to greet her. Others stared. Some smiled with warmth that felt like pity. Then Silas appeared beside her, the man who had not attended Mass in 15 years. He stood next to Ruth through the entire service, his quiet presence a statement louder than any words. The whispers shifted. Speculation became confusion, became slowly acceptance. Summer brought tourist season, and with it the accidents that wilderness always inflicts on the unprepared. Ruth and Silas became an unofficial mountain rescue team, their reputation growing with each successful intervention. June brought a hiker with a broken ankle 8 miles into backcountry. Ruth stabilized the fracture while Silas coordinated with the county sheriff. The helicopter extraction went smoothly. The hiker's family tried to pay them. They refused. July brought 3 college students lost and dehydrated, no water for 18 hours. Silas tracked them using skills honed over decades. Ruth treated their heat exhaustion and dehydration with the calm efficiency of someone who had seen worse. Much worse. August brought Emma Davidson. 19 years old, rock climbing accident, compound fracture with bone protruding through skin. 8 miles from the nearest road. Winds too high for immediate helicopter response. The emergency coordinator's voice crackled through the radio. Ground team is 4 hours out minimum. Ruth looked at Silas. He looked back. Neither spoke the obvious truth. The girl would not survive 4 hours. I'm going in, Ruth told the radio. Talk me through what I need. The hike was brutal. Ruth carried a 40-pound medical pack. Silas led the way, choosing the fastest route over the safest. They were 72 and 67 years old. They should not have been doing this, but there was no one else. Emma was screaming when they arrived, the sound raw and animal, bone white against red flesh, blood pooling, shock setting in with terrifying speed. Ruth knelt beside Hay, became entirely the nurse she had been for 40 years, morphine for pain, saline water for blood pressure. Then the hard part, reducing the fracture, pushing bone back through torn flesh while Emma screamed and Ruth whispered prayers and Silas held the girl still, with hands gentle as a father's. The helicopter arrived 2 hours later. Emma was stable, alive, would keep her leg and probably regain full function. At the hospital the next day, Emma's parents could not stop crying. You saved our daughter's life. How can we ever thank you? Tell people what we do, Ruth said simply. If others need help in the mountains, tell them to call. The local newspaper ran a story. Elderly duo saves college climber. The article went regional. CNN picked it up. Suddenly, Ruth and Silas were minor celebrities which both of them hated. But the publicity had an unexpected effect. Public opinion shifted. The scandal of a former nun living with a mountain man became the heartwarming story of two elderly people proving age was no barrier to service. Then the letter arrived. Cascade Mountain Resorts, LLC. An offer for Silas's land. $2.3 million. Silas tossed it in the fire without reading past the first paragraph. Get these every few years, he said. Always ignore them. But Ruth fished the letter out before it could burn completely. Read it through. Felt cold certainty settle in her chest. This is different. The amount is too high. They're desperate. She was right. Over the next months, the pressure increased. Property tax assessment tripled overnight. Code inspectors discovered violations that had not existed for 15 years. Anonymous complaints about unlicensed medical practice. Ruth investigated, discovered the truth. Cascade Resorts had been buying surrounding land for years. They needed Silas's 160 acres to complete a 2,000-acre resort development. Without it, the whole project died. They're going to come at us harder, Ruth warned. We need to prepare. She was right about that, too. The blizzard arrived in late November, early even for Montana. The man who appeared at their door claimed to be a lost hiker, Richard Davies. His story did not quite hold together, but you do not turn people away in a blizzard. The second day, Ruth caught him photographing property documents, measuring cabin dimensions, taking notes on land boundaries. You're not a lost hiker. Ruth's voice was cold. Who are you? Richard dropped the pretense. Land surveyor. Cascade hired me to assess the property and document any irregularities. Silas appeared in the doorway. His voice was quiet, but something in it made Richard take a step backward. You lied to get into my home. I'm just doing my job. You're going to lose this property anyway. Better to take the money now. Get out. Ruth's voice matched Silas's for quiet intensity. I can't. Storm's too dangerous. Silas crossed to the gun cabinet, removed his rifle, did not point it at anyone, just held it with the casual familiarity of someone completely comfortable with the weapon. Two choices. Leave now despite the storm. Dangerous, but you made it here so you can make it out. Or stay in that corner under watch until the weather clears, then leave and never come back. I tracked grizzlies for 15 years. I can track you if necessary. Richard chose to stay, spent 36 miserable hours essentially under house arrest, sleeping in a corner, watched constantly, no privacy, no comfort. When the storm finally broke, he left quickly. But his parting words carried weight. You can't win this. Cascade has lawyers, money, political connections. They always win eventually. Ruth watched him disappear into the trees. We have something they don't. We're right, and we're not leaving. In the present, the cabin suddenly felt too warm. Marcus looked at Silas with new understanding. So that's when it started getting bad, when the developers really came after you. Silas nodded. That's when we realized this was a fight, not just about land, but about what matters. Purpose versus profit. Service versus money. Everything your great-grandmother Ruth had left her order to protect. But you won. You're still here. We won, Silas confirmed, but not alone. That's the part of the story people forget. We didn't save ourselves. The community we'd been serving, they saved us. Marcus leaned forward. How? Silas smiled. That's part three, son. The part where everything we'd built together got tested, where Ruth had to choose all over again, and where we learned that legacy isn't about what you accomplish. It's about who remembers and why. Outside, the sun was climbing higher. Marcus would leave for boot camp tomorrow. But today he had time for one more part of the story, time to hear how an old nun and an older hermit built something that outlasted them both. The winter of 2001 brought more than snow. It brought pressure, systematic and relentless. Cascade Resorts had decided that patience was no longer profitable. December brought an inspector from the state health department, anonymous complaint about unlicensed medical practice. Ruth showed her nursing license, still valid, maintained through continuing education she completed by correspondence. The inspector found no violations, but the harassment had made its point. They were being watched. January 2002 brought surveying teams onto adjacent properties, their equipment and vehicles creating noise and disruption. Twice they crossed onto Silas's land, claiming GPS errors, marking trees, and taking measurements before Ruth confronted them with threats of trespassing charges. February brought the newspaper article. The Helena Independent, owned by a publisher with financial ties to resort development. The headline made Ruth's hands shake with fury. Elderly hermit safety concern or stubborn liability. The article implied that Silas was too old to manage the property safely, that Ruth was enabling a dangerous lifestyle. That concerned citizens worried about liability if either of them was injured on land they stubbornly refused to sell. But the article backfired. Jose Lee wrote a letter to the editor that ran the following week. Silas Drummond saved my life when I had a heart attack. Ruth Brennan kept me alive until help arrived. Anyone who questions their competence is welcome to come ask me in person. Emma Davidson's parents wrote next. This couple rescued our daughter when she was dying from a climbing accident. The newspaper should be ashamed for attacking people who risk their lives to save others. Hospital staff circulated a petition. 37 medical professionals signed it. Ruth Brennan has assisted in dozens of emergency rescues over the past 2 years. Her skills save lives. This attack on her character is unconscionable. Ruth read the letters and felt something warm in her chest. Not pride exactly, vindication maybe, or simply the comfort of knowing they were not as alone as Cascade wanted them to believe. She spent March and April investigating. Her organizational skills, honed through 40 years of Catholic bureaucracy, proved ideally suited to corporate research. She discovered the full scope of Cascade's plan. 2,000 acres, luxury resort, golf course, spa, conference center, 800 construction jobs, 400 permanent positions, and 160-acre hole right in the middle where Silas's property sat like a stone in expensive machinery. They can't proceed without us, Ruth told Silas, spreading maps across the kitchen table. The land parcels don't connect. Environmental regulations require contiguous ownership for the water rights. We're not just in their way. We're the piece that makes the whole puzzle work or fail. So they're desperate. Very, which makes them dangerous. Ruth was right about that, but she did not understand yet how dangerous or how the threat would come not from lawyers or politicians, but from something far more primal. She found unexpected allies in late spring. The Montana Environmental Coalition responding to her carefully researched inquiry. David Brennan, no relation, but the coincidence made them both smile, was a lawyer who specialized in environmental protection cases. If we can document the environmental damage this resort would cause, David explained over the phone, we can block the development entirely. EPA regulations are strict about watershed protection. So Ruth and Silas spent May and June documenting grizzly tracks and elk migration paths, spring locations and stream flows, wetlands that appeared seasonally but were protected year-round under federal law, native plant species, some rare enough to trigger additional protections. Silas moved through the mountains with quiet purpose, his camera capturing evidence. Ruth organized it all with the precision of someone who had once managed medical supplies for a mission clinic serving 3,000 people. You missed your calling, Silas said one evening, watching Ruth create filing systems and cross-reference databases. You should have been a lawyer. Franciscans are supposed to care for creation, Ruth replied. I'm finally getting to practice what I preached. They did not know that their careful documentation would matter less than they hoped, that the real battle would be fought not with evidence and law, but with something far more immediate and visceral. December 2002 arrived with weather forecasts that made even experienced mountain residents nervous. Worst storm system in 30 years. The National Weather Service issued warnings in language that was unusually blunt. Life-threatening conditions. Do not travel. Ruth was restocking medical supplies when the emergency radio crackled to life. 2 in the morning. The sound pulled both her and Silas from sleep with adrenaline-sharp urgency. This is County Emergency Services. We have a missing church youth group, saw Michael's Parish, Helena. 15 teenagers, 3 adults. Last known position approximately 6 miles from Drummond property. Ground rescue teams cannot reach them for minimum 12 hours. Helicopters are grounded. Ruth's heart stopped. She recognized names being read over the radio. St. Michael's was her old parish, the one where she had attended Mass before the whispers got too loud. Father Walsh was leading the trip. The same Father Walsh who had confronted her in this cabin 2 years ago, who had questioned her vocation and called her living arrangement scandalous. I know those woods, Ruth said, already moving, pulling on layers. From our supply runs to town. I can navigate them. Silas was right behind her, no hesitation despite knowing what she was about to suggest. We're 72 and 67, in a blizzard. That's a suicide mission. They're children, Silas, and I taught 2 of those teenagers in catechism class before I left. Even if we reach them, we can't evacuate 18 people alone. We keep them alive until help arrives. That's enough. Silas looked at her face in the dim cabin light, saw the determination there. New argument was pointless. We'll be slow. Ruth met his eyes, remembered the first time he had said those words to her when she had been the one bleeding and helpless. But we'll get there. The journey was everything they feared and worse. Wind-driven snow reduced visibility to arm's length. Temperature sat at -15 before wind chill. They moved by compass and GPS and Silas's intimate knowledge of terrain he had walked for 17 years. Mile 1 was hard. Mile 2 was harder. By mile 3, Ruth's feet were going numb despite insulated boots. Silas called a halt, insisted they stop and rewarm in the emergency shelter he carried. We don't have time, Ruth protested. Dead rescuers save nobody. Which Silas's voice carried the authority of someone who had survived decades in wilderness that killed the careless. We follow protocol, or we turn back. They warmed their feet, drank hot liquid from a thermos. 15 minutes that felt like failure, but was actually survival. Then back into the storm. Mile 4 brought the steepest terrain. Ruth slipped on ice hidden beneath fresh snow. Would have fallen into a ravine if Silas had not grabbed her arm with reflexes that defied his 72 years. Careful, he said quietly. Can't lose you now. After everything we've survived, a ravine would be embarrassing. The dark humor helped, kept fear at bay, kept them moving when everything hurt and stopping seemed logical, and death was just cold enough to be comfortable if you let it. They found the group at mile 6, huddled in an inadequate snow cave, hypothermia setting and panic rising. 3 teenagers were unconscious. Father Walsh had a broken ankle and could barely speak through chattering teeth. Ruth looked at 18 people in various stages of cold injury and felt time compress. This was the moment, everything she had trained for, everything she had given up, her vows to be able to do. If she failed here, if any of these children died, then all of it had been for nothing. She did not fail. Listen to me. Her voice cut through panic like a blade. I'm Ruth Brennan, Wilderness EMT. Everyone follow my instructions exactly. No questions, no debate, just obedience. The word obedience felt strange in her mouth, but it worked. Panic receded slightly. Training took over. Triage. The worst cases first. Emma Rodriguez, 16 core temperature dangerously low. David Chen, 15 hypothermia and frostbite on both hands. Sarah Mitchell, 17 hypothermia responsive but confused. Mr. Garrett, Ruth snapped at one of the adult chaperones. Start a fire with the supplies I brought. Mrs. Patterson, help me with Emma. She's critical. Mrs. Patterson, the woman who had deliberately turned away from Ruth at Mass, who had called her a scandal and a disgrace. Now she stumbled forward, desperate to help, willing to follow any order from the woman she had condemned. "Remove her wet clothes," Ruth ordered. "Wrap her with Mr. Garrett's body heat in a sleeping bag. Skin-to-skin contact now." "That's not appropriate," Mrs. Patterson stammered. Ruth's voice went cold. "She will die in 30 minutes without rewarming. Choose. Propriety or life. Decide now." Mrs. Patterson chose life. Helped strip the unconscious girl. Got her wrapped against Mr. Garrett's chest in the sleeping bag Ruth provided. Then turned to help with the next patient, because there was always a next patient. Silas, meanwhile, was building shelter, reinforcing their inadequate snow cave with tarps and debris, setting up the emergency radio with batteries that were dying, but had enough life for intermittent contact with rescuers who were still hours away. Father Walsh lay against the cave wall, his face gray with pain and cold. He watched Ruth work with an expression that moved from recognition to shame to something approaching awe. "Sister Ruth," he whispered through chattering teeth. "Not sister any more," Ruth corrected, not looking up from treating David's frostbite. "And we'll discuss theology after I save your life, Father." Then Emma crashed. Her heart, stressed beyond endurance by hypothermia, simply stopped beating. The portable monitor Ruth had attached showed a flat line that was also a countdown to irreversible death. "No," Ruth's voice was prayer and curse together. "Not this child. Not today." She started chest compressions. In a blizzard, in a snow cave, with hands that were cold and tired and 67 years old, counting compressions, maintaining rhythm, misses. Patterson doing rescue breaths because Ruth had taught her how in between treating other patients. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. The medical literature said brain damage became likely after 4 minutes without oxygen, became certain after 6. After 10, there was no coming back. Emma gasped. Her heart caught, stuttered, caught again. The monitor showed rhythm erratic but present, life improbable but real. Ruth kept compressing for another minute, making sure the rhythm stabilized, then sat back, breathing hard enough to hurt, and looked at Mrs. Patterson. "Good work. Keep monitoring her breathing. Watch for another arrest." Mrs. Patterson was crying. "How did you know what to do?" 40 years of practice. Now focus. We're not done yet." The hours crawled past. Ruth moved from patient to patient, checking temperatures, adjusting treatments, talking to each teenager in calm tones that made hypothermia seem manageable instead of life-threatening. Silas maintained the shelter kept the fire going, coordinated with rescuers over a radio that kept cutting out. Dawn broke with the storm finally weakening. The radio crackled with news. Helicopter inbound. 20 minutes. Silas shot flares into the clearing sky. Red stars rising above white mountains. A signal that help had arrived, that rescue was possible, that 18 people would go home because 2 elderly people had refused to accept that age was a reason to quit. The helicopter took them all. Teenagers, adults, Father Walsh on a stretcher. The paramedics moved with efficient speed, loading patients, checking vital signs, asking questions. One of them, a woman in her 30s with kind eyes, stopped beside Ruth. "Ma'am, how did 2 people pull this off?" Ruth looked at Silas. He looked back. Both were beyond exhaustion, running on fumes and will. "We were slow," Ruth said quietly, "but we were there." The hospital kept Ruth overnight for observation. Exhaustion, mild hypothermia, dehydration. She would recover completely with rest. They wanted to keep her longer, but she refused. There was work to do at home. Always more work. Father Walsh appeared in her room before she could escape. He was in a wheelchair, ankle in a cast, but he had come anyway. His face carried an expression Ruth had never seen there before. Humility, maybe? Or grace? "Ruth, I owe you my life, and an apology." "You owe me nothing, Father. I judged you. 2 years ago in that cabin, I called your work here scandalous. Said you had abandoned your vocation." He stopped, his voice breaking. "Last night, freezing in that shelter, watching you save Emma's life, I understood. You didn't leave religious life. You found where God actually wanted you to be. I was wrong, the church was wrong, I'm sorry." Ruth felt tears on her face. Thank you. That means everything. Emma Rodriguez's parents came next. The girl was stable, would recover completely, would keep all her fingers despite the frostbite. Her parents could not stop crying. You brought our daughter back from the dead, Mrs. Rodriguez said. How do we thank you? How do we possibly repay that? Tell people, Ruth replied. Tell them what we do up here. If others need help, tell them to call. But the media had already found the story. By evening, news crews were at the hospital. By the next morning, it was regional news. By that afternoon, CNN had picked it up. Elderly mountain duo saves 18 in blizzard rescue. Human interest piece with footage of Ruth and Silas looking uncomfortable in front of cameras. Former nun, 72-year-old hermit, impossible rescue in impossible conditions. The story went viral in the way stories could go viral in 2002. Email forwards, message boards, local news stations across the country picking it up for feel-good closing segments. And public opinion shifted like a landslide. Social media such as it was erupted. How dare Cascade Resorts harass the people who saved our children? Petitions circulated. Protect Silas Drummond's land. County commissioners received thousands of emails and phone calls. The hearing was scheduled for January 2003. Public comment on Cascades Resort proposal? Standard procedure, usually boring, attended by dozens. This time the county courthouse was standing room only, 200 people crammed into a space meant for 80. Ruth and Silas sat in the back trying to be invisible. The community would not let them. Cascade's presentation went first. Richard Thornton's smooth and inexpensive suit delivered a polished pitch. Slideshow with architectural renderings. Economic projections showing job creation and tax revenue. Professional persuasive backed by millions of dollars in planning and preparation. Then the opposition spoke. Jose Lee went first. 70 years old heart attack survivor. Walking with a cane, but walking nonetheless. Silas Drummond saved my life 3 years ago. Ruth Brennan kept me alive when my heart stopped beating. You take their land, you send a message to every elderly person in this county. Your contributions don't matter once you reach a certain age. Is that the message we want to send? Emma Rodriguez was next. 17 now healthy alive. I died in a blizzard. My heart stopped beating. Ruth Brennan brought me back to life with her bare hands, while my body temperature was so low I should have been dead already. My parents still have me because of her. My little brothers still have their sister. How can we even consider taking her home? Father Walsh limped to the microphone without crutches, his ankle healed, but the memory fresh. I am a diocesan priest. 2 years ago, I tried to force Ruth Brennan to leave these mountains. I told her what she was doing wasn't legitimate ministry. I was wrong. Profoundly, completely wrong. What she and Silas do is ministry in its truest form. Serving forgotten people in forgotten places. The Catholic Church should support them, not Cascade Resorts. The hospital staff came as a group. Dr. Ellen Cho spoke for them. In 3 years, Ruth Brennan and Silas Drummond have assisted in 47 emergency rescues in our coverage area. 17 of those patients would have died without their intervention. They are unpaid volunteers who save lives. Displacing them creates a public health crisis. We oppose this development in the strongest possible terms. The Environmental Coalition presented their findings. Wetland destruction, watershed contamination, grizzly habitat disruption, federal violations that would trigger lawsuits regardless of local approval. Then Ruth stood. She had not planned to speak, had told Silas she would stay quiet, let others fight this battle. But something pulled her to her feet, moved her to the microphone, gave her words she had not prepared. My name is Ruth Brennan. I'm 67 years old. I spent 40 years as a Franciscan nun, took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Loved that life deeply, served it faithfully. Her voice carried in the silent courtroom. People leaned forward to hear better. But at 65, I was told I was too old for meaningful work, told to retire to a desk, told my time of usefulness had passed. I thought that was wrong then. I know it's wrong now. She looked at Silas sitting in the back row. He nodded slightly. Permission, encouragement, partnership. Silas Drummond is 72. When I met him, he was living alone, isolated, convinced his productive years were finished. Together, we discovered something. Age doesn't equal uselessness. 72 and 67 aren't endpoints. They're opportunities. Ruth turned to face the county commissioners directly. If you approve this development, you're making a statement. You're saying elderly people who choose meaningful lives over comfortable retirements are obstacles to progress. You're saying productivity matters more than purpose. You're saying the people who save lives are worth less than the people who build golf courses. Her voice strengthened. I'm asking you to make a different statement. Say that service matters. Say that people who risk their lives for strangers deserve protection, not displacement. Say that the value of a life isn't measured in tax revenue. She sat down to silence, then applause. Started with Jose, spread to Emma's parents, became a wave that the commissioners could not ignore even if they wanted to. The vote was 5-2 against Cascade's proposal. An additional motion passed 4-3. Silas's land would be designated a conservation easement permanently protected from development. Outside the courthouse, the crowd wanted to celebrate. Ruth and Silas wanted to go home. They slipped away while people were still congratulating each other, drove back to the cabin in comfortable silence. Thank you, Silas said finally as they pulled up to the familiar log structure. For what? For that speech, for fighting for this place, for being brave when I couldn't be. Ruth smiled. We're partners. You've been brave plenty of times for me. My turn. Spring brought an unexpected visitor, a black sedan navigating mountain roads with careful precision. Ruth recognized the diocese plates and felt old anxiety rise before remembering she was no longer subject to church authority. Bishop Robert Hendricks emerged from the car, 60 years old, kind eyes, carrying himself with the comfortable authority of someone who knew his power and chose mercy over might whenever possible. Miss Brennan, he said, offering his hand. Ruth is fine, Your Excellency. Then I'm Robert when we're speaking privately. He smiled. May I come in? Over coffee at the kitchen table, the bishop explained his visit. I've been following your story for 2 years now. Reading reports, talking to Father Walsh, praying about what it means. He paused. I came to apologize, on behalf of the church, for how you were treated. Ruth felt her throat tighten. Your Excellency, I made my choices freely. No apology is needed. I think one is. You didn't abandon your calling. You evolved it, found a different expression of the same fundamental vocation. The church should have celebrated that, not condemned it. The church has rules for good reasons, rules that sometimes become chains. Robert leaned forward. Ruth, I want to formally recognize your work as lay ministry of this diocese. No vows, no restrictions. You remain completely free, but official acknowledgement that what you do is God's work. We'll provide liability insurance, medical supply, funding emergency equipment. You continue exactly as you are. We support from a distance. Ruth stared at him. Why now? Because Father Walsh told me what you said in that snow cave, that you discussed theology after you saved his life. That's the gospel in action. That's what Jesus actually did. Healed first, preach second. The church needs to remember that. You're teaching us by example. After the bishop left, Silas found Ruth standing by the window crying quietly. Good tears or bad tears? He asked. Good, I think. I didn't realize how much I needed the church's blessing until I had it. Does it change anything? No, we continue exactly as we are. But now I know I didn't fail, didn't betray my vows, just lived them differently. The years unfolded. 2003 brought the formation of Mountain Guardian Services, a registered nonprofit, training programs for wilderness first response, partnership with county emergency services. Ruth became a certified wilderness EMT instructor at 68 years old, teaching others the skills she had honed over decades. 2004 and 2005 brought deeper community integration. Sunday dinners with Jose and neighbors became tradition. Ruth teaching wilderness safety at local schools. Silas reluctantly speaking at the Catholic men's group about his faith journey. Former sisters visiting, some reconciling, some still holding distance. 2006 brought Ruth's niece Catherine and her children. 4-year-old Marcus watched his great-aunt with wide eyes, fascinated by the woman everyone called a hero. Catherine pulled Ruth aside during the visit. Aunt Ruth, I've never seen you this happy. Because I'm needed, not in theory, in practice. Not filing papers, but saving lives. 2007 brought Silas's stroke, minor but frightening. Ruth nursed him through recovery with fierce protectiveness, roles reversed from their beginning. He hated being weak, hated needing help. She reminded him gently that he had taught her to accept assistance. Now it was his turn to learn the same lesson. He recovered fully, but they both understood. They were aging, slowing down, would not be able to do this work forever. 2008 brought the beginning of succession planning. They started training younger rescuers. Tom Whitfield, 32, former paramedic looking for meaning beyond emergency rooms. Sarah Chen, 28, wilderness guide wanting to give back. Marcus Rodriguez, 24. Emma's older brother who had found purpose through his sister's rescue. The cabin became a permanent mountain rescue station. The bishop established the Drummond Brennan Mountain Ministry Fund, ensuring their work would continue after they were gone. Winter of 2008 arrived with familiar cold. Ruth was 73 now. Silas, 78. They sat by the fire one evening reflecting on the 8 years since a bear attack had brought them together. "Do you ever regret it?" Ruth asked. "Letting me stay that first winter?" "Never." Silas's answer was immediate. I regret the pain I caused Mother Frances, but not the choice itself, never the choice." "Frances still alive?" "Yes, we write occasionally. She softened over the years. Last Christmas she wrote something that meant everything. She said, 'Ruth, I'm proud of what you've built.' I didn't understand then. I do now." They discussed the future, the training programs in place, the younger rescuers ready to take over primary response duties, the legacy they had built together without ever intending to build one at all. "We're not getting younger," Silas observed with characteristic understatement. "Then we pass it on," Ruth replied. "That's what legacy means. Not what we accomplish, but what continues after we're gone." Late March brought one final call. Injured hiker 4 miles out. Tom Whitfield insisted he could handle it alone. Ruth and Silas exchanged a look. "We'll come," Silas said. "You might need guidance." Besides, Ruth added, "We're not dead yet." The hike was slow. Tom wanted to rush ahead. They held him back, teaching through demonstration. "Speed doesn't save lives," Silas said. "Precision does." "We'll be slow," Ruth added, "but we'll be right." At the scene, a young woman with a compound leg fracture. Ruth's assessment was expert calm, exactly what the situation required. Tom watched in awe. "How do you two do this in your 70s?" he asked. "Practice," Ruth said. "And purpose," Silas finished. In the present, Marcus sat across from his great-grandfather, the story complete, but the lesson still unfolding. Outside, morning had become afternoon. Tomorrow felt closer. "So that's how it all started," Marcus said quietly. "Great-grandma Ruth gave up everything to find her purpose at 65. Silas nodded. "And I learned to accept help at 70. We taught each other what we each needed to learn." "Where is she now?" Silas's face showed the grief that 8 decades had taught him to carry with grace. "She passed 2 years ago, 88 years old. Heart attack while teaching a wilderness first aid class. Died doing exactly what she loved." Marcus felt tears on his face. "I wish I'd known her better." "She knew you. Every year on your birthday she'd say the same thing. 'That boy is going to do important things. I can feel it.'" Silas leaned forward. "Before she died, she asked me to tell you something." "What?" "She said, Marcus, when I was 65, the world told me I was finished. Too old for purpose, too old for meaning. The best choice I ever made was refusing to believe that." Silas's voice was steady, but his eyes were wet. "Tell our Marcus, tell my great-grandson, that being young and scared is no different than being old and scared. Fear is fear, but purpose defeats fear. He's not too young for the Marines. I wasn't too old for the mountains. Age is an excuse. Purpose is the answer." Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I'm still scared." "You should be. Fear means you're taking it seriously. But scared isn't the same as wrong. You know what you're supposed to do, Papim. Your purpose is calling you toward it. What if I fail?" "Then you fail trying. Ruth and I failed plenty. Jose's heart stopped twice before we got it going again. Emma died and we brought her back. The county hearing could have gone against us. We didn't know we'd win. We just knew we had to try." Marcus walked to the window, looked out at mountains that had witnessed everything his great-grandparents had built. "I leave tomorrow." "I know. Will you be okay here? Silas smiled. I'm 95 years old, living in a house that's now a staffed rescue station. Mountain Guardian Services has 30 active volunteers. I'm never alone. Ruth made sure of that before she died. She thought of everything. She was a nun for 40 years. Planning was what they taught. Silas stood with the careful deliberation of age crossed to Marcus, put a weathered hand on his great-grandson's shoulder. Go serve your country. Come back when you can. This cabin, this work, this legacy, it'll be here, waiting for you if you want it, or cheering you on if you find your purpose somewhere else. Marcus hugged him, careful of fragile bones, fierce with love. Thank you for the story, for everything. Thank your great-grandmother. She's the one who taught me everything worth knowing. The next morning, Marcus left for Paris Island. Silas watched from the porch, coffee in hand, as the young man who carried Ruth's courage in his blood drove away to find his own mountain to climb. 20 years later, the placard outside the cabin would read differently. Mountain Guardian Rescue Station, established 2003, in memory of Silas Drummond, 1930 to 2025, and Ruth Brennan, 1935 to 23. We'll be slow, but we'll get there. But on this January morning in 2025, Silas was still alive. Still watching over the mountains Ruth had taught him to see differently. Still available when the radio crackled with emergencies, offering advice to younger rescuers, teaching by example even at 95. The radio came to life now, Tom Whitfield's voice crackling through static. Silas, we've got an injured climber, 5 miles out. Team's responding. Silas keyed the microphone. Copy that, Tom. Be safe. Be thorough. We'll be slow, but you'll get there. Silas set down the radio and looked out at mountains eternal and indifferent. Somewhere among those peaks, Ruth's spirit was laughing, telling him he'd told the story too long, that Marcus would miss his bus. But also proud, always proud, they had built something that lasted, not just the rescue service or the trained volunteers or the lives saved. They had built proof that purpose had no age limit, that the years from 65 to 95 could be the most meaningful of all if you refused to believe the lie that old meant useless. Silas closed his eyes, feeling winter sun on his weathered face. 25 years since a bear had brought a bleeding nun to his mountain. 25 years of partnership and purpose, and learning that slow did not mean stopped. He thought about Marcus heading towards his own test, his own proving ground. Thought about all the young people over the years who had come to the cabin seeking something they could not name. Purpose maybe, or just the knowledge that their lives could matter. Ruth had shown him that knowledge was not taught, it was lived. You did not convince people their lives had meaning. You demonstrated meaning through how you lived your own. The mountains stood patient as they had for millions of years. The cabin held its warmth. The radio waited for the next call. And Silas Drummond, 95 years old, former engineer, former seminary student, former hermit, current guardian of a legacy built with a woman who had taught him that partnership mattered more than solitude, sat on his porch and waited to see what the day would bring. He did not have to wait long, because there was always another hiker, always another emergency, always another chance to prove that age was just a number and purpose was everything. We'll be slow, he thought, hearing Ruth's voice echo in memory, but we'll get there. Always had, always would, until the day came when someone else would have to carry it forward. But that was the beauty of legacy. It did not end when you did. It continued in every life you touched, every person you saved, every young rescuer you trained. Marcus would be fine. The boy had Ruth's courage in his blood and Silas's stubbornness in his bones. Boot camp would be hard. Service would be harder. But he would get through it the same way they had gotten through everything. By being slow, by being thorough, by refusing to quit when quitting seemed reasonable, by understanding that the most important journeys were not the fast ones. They were the ones where you arrived exactly when you were needed, no matter how long it took to get there.